Hi, everyone, and welcome to our final week of technical writing. I have three lectures again this week. The first two are going to cover interesting topics in technical writing, as we've done over the past couple weeks. We have thinking globally, composing locally, as the topic for this lecture, which is a topic I stole from the title of a book, which I will cite below. And I also have some information from that book I want to present to you. The other one is genre studies. I think we're going to approach that one a little bit like we approach the other research methods in technical writing. We don't really have a ton of time in a 5-week course to go and practice it, but it is a topic I want you to know first exists, and secondly, how we kind of think about it. Our last lecture for the week, I think it's going to be a little bit long. I'm sorry, I haven't recorded it yet. But I want to cover the future of writing and generative AI. So topics or tools, I should say, like ChatGPT. In that lecture, I want to tie a lot of the strands of our course together. So if there have been points in this course where you were thinking, why am I writing about my favorite song or a space I go to often, or why am I telling my life story in a technical format? I'm hoping a lot of that will make sense in the final lecture of this week when we cover artificial intelligence and what it can do and what it can't do yet. But before we get too much into that, let's cover this week's topic, which, as I mentioned, we'll call it Thinking Globally, Composing Locally. And I will go into presentation mode. And this is all about the fact that when we sit down and write, we do it in one space, me here in my computer in my office. But these days, especially as I'm publishing this on YouTube, you have to think, what could anybody think about this? Because what we put out there is available a lot of the times to just everybody in the world now. You can think about how you might have answered things differently on Canvas if we were on a public site and everybody could see what we were doing. And so this stuff comes from your textbook, the Gross and All book that we've been reading just kind of parts of throughout the last 5 weeks. But they define culture this way. They say that culture consists of the shared beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, values, and assumptions shared by an identified group of people. And then they give it 5 qualifiers. First, they say it's learned, which means, we're not born with culture. If right when you were born, we picked you up and took you somewhere else, you would have learned that culture instead of maybe the northeastern U.S. culture, if that's where you're from. It's shared, which means that what you do alone by yourself can't really be a culture thing. Culture has to be shared among people, among groups. It's dynamic, which means that it's always changing. And I think you can probably agree with that if you reflect over the course of your lifetime. If you think about music and slang and maybe rituals that people have, especially things that were disrupted or shifted by the COVID pandemic, we saw big changes in our culture then. Next, it's systemic. That's a word you've heard a couple of times in this course so far. I hope you're getting comfortable with it. Basically, it means that genre is not just one part of your lifestyle first, right? It's not just your religion or just your friend group or just your university. Genre is kind of a system of all of those things and how they interact and shape your life. And then more importantly, they're systemic in the fact that they're always going to be touching up against and interacting with other systems of culture. And so even once you've maybe been able to define your culture and figure it out, you might interact with somebody from a different culture, and that again can cause yours to be a little bit more dynamic. And then lastly, it's symbolic, which is a word I'd love to see in writing studies. You'll see it in literature, linguistics as well. But basically that our culture is shared in symbols, which you can think first and foremost about writing, and especially technical writing. How are we maybe bringing particular parts of our culture to the reader's attention, whether we're using boldface or whether we're making sure we wear a particular t-shirt so people know that that's our culture. And so it is symbolic in the sense that we share it through words, we share it through language, through writing, which is always done in symbols, but it's also symbolic in the icons we use and the illustrations and these kinds of things. So for technical communication, particularly business writing, as kind of part and parcel with TechCom. The authors of our textbook leave us this, and I really like this selection. They said, global business is more than trade between companies located in distinct countries. Indeed, that concept is already outdated. Intercultural and international business focuses less on the borders that separate people and more on the communication that brings them together. Business communication values clear, concise interaction that promotes efficiency and effectiveness. You may perceive your role as a communicator within a specific city, business, or organization, but you need to be aware that your role crosses cultures, languages, value, and legal systems, and borders. And so I really wanted to draw our attention to these two words here, efficiency and effectiveness. Because we've used those words a lot throughout the semester when I talked about using the methods of efficient or effective technical communication that I've already covered in your writing. Well, now the textbook and I am telling you we have to think, I think, a little bit broadly about those terms sometimes. The stuff that's worthwhile content, for example, for us here in the Northeast or Mid-Atlantic United States, however you want to define it, those might not be the same types of worthwhile content that people in other parts of the United States would want to see, and maybe not in Europe or Africa or other continents and cultures. And so while we always do value that clear conciseness and efficiency and effectiveness, just what those words mean can vary. Here in the US, I think, I speak generally here, but I think we tend to go directly to the most important information. We want you to know what we think and what our question is immediately. Some of you can maybe reflect on your emails to me throughout the course, where the email is essentially, hello, here's my question, thanks, and goodbye. Where maybe in other cultures where there might be other cultures where it would be more polite or considered more efficient to say something about yourself and say something about the struggles you're dealing with before asking a question. And so these are ideas to think about when you're thinking about being a technical communicator after this course, where, again, what you write might not be accessible to only one group or in one location. It might be accessible to everybody in the world, potentially, if it's on the website, if it's on a website. So again, just a really interesting selection, I thought, and one that brought some of those words that we've been using a lot in our course back to the forefront of my mind, for sure. So this does come from the book I mentioned at the top of the lecture. That book is right here next to me, and it's called Thinking Globally, Composing Locally. And give me a second, it has a clever subtitle. So Thinking Globally, Composing Locally, Rethinking Online Writing in the Age of the Global Internet. And again, I'll put the citation below. It's actually a book of essays, so there's lots of different opinions presented in that book. But this comes from the introduction, and so it is by the editors that you'll see in the citation below. But they say when we're in this context, when we're writing in our one place, but also putting information out there for the World Wide Web, we have particular friction points. And the first friction point is access. And they say the question we have to ask ourselves with this is, can your audience get to what you have composed? And so already in this lecture, you've heard me say that you can potentially reach a global audience if you put something online. But we still have to consider where are the places that the internet hasn't reached yet, or where are the places where the internet can't be relied on as often as it can here in Delaware, or maybe wherever you are currently. The next friction point, they say, is comprehension. Can your audience understand what you composed as you intended it? And so again, you heard me mention the email before. Here in the US, we value getting right to the point. You say hello, you ask your question, and that's it. But maybe in other cultures, they wouldn't comprehend it the same way. Maybe getting directly to the question like that would be comprehended as rude or insulting, because it doesn't introduce the person, it doesn't introduce their state of mind, it doesn't have the pleasantries that you might see in different cultures, or maybe some of the legal markers. But we'll get to that in just a second as well. And then action. Can your audience make use or act upon the information provided as you intended? And so a phrase you've definitely heard me mention in this course, and you've seen it on the discussion posts a few times, is the idea of user advocacy. How well are we actually advocating for our actual user? And so when we're putting stuff out on the internet, let's say it's a how-to guide on YouTube or something like that, have you actually interacted rather with the intended users of that material or content, and can they actually make use of what you're saying? Because if not, what you figured out in your local composition might not actually be all that accessible globally, the way that these methods of publication make it seem like they can be. And so they give us a few questions for examining these friction points. They say first, we need to do a technological examination. And so they tell us we need to look at the hardware that people will have access to throughout the world. And so obviously here in the US, I think we're all used to kind of having our iPhones in our pocket. And maybe if we had a how-to guide on fixing a car or something like that, we could be looking under the hood and have our phone right there. Whereas in other cultures where the mobile technologies we have aren't as widely spread, you need to consider what kind of hardware might somebody throughout the world be using to view this video, and what can they take away from it. And so when you think about contrast or those videos we watched on the first week of the semester where there were little icons or step-by-step instructions, you think maybe somebody could have written those down and walked back to whatever they needed to do instead of have their phone right there and available. Software is kind of the same thing. Again, I'm just thinking in terms of our culture versus what might be there globally. But yeah, we're used to having the newest apps, everything up to date on our phones and things like that a lot of the times. But that might not be true for everybody. And then that includes the networks that people are connected to. And so if you're trying to get your information out there through local networks or through communities that you already know, to consider that maybe the people who need to get that information aren't connected to that network or in that network of people, to use it kind of in a different way. They say there's cultural ways of examining friction points. First, we have to think about language. Do the people where we might have an audience actually use the same language as us literally? As in, do they speak English, American English? Do they speak mid-Atlantic kind of slang? And if not, how do we adjust our language so that everybody can get a hold of it? With this, sometimes what I think about is making language that's or using language that can easily be translated. And so avoiding those English words that are kind of vague or that might have two meanings, and favoring ones that do have a direct translation, rather than the kind of words that can be up in the air. Rhetoric, again, I've hit this one a bunch of times on this video already, so I feel bad saying it again. But yeah, the same idea with the email, right? Is it rhetorically appropriate in a culture to get directly to the point, or are you writing for a culture where maybe they appreciate finding out other information about the originator of the information than just the raw data or raw info that we look for? And then lastly, we can legally examine friction points by thinking about the different laws that exist in different places. And so again, if you put something out on the web, are there countries where you would be censored for saying that? And if people in that country still need to hear your information, how could you work within the local laws of that place to still compose something here that can be consumed rather everywhere? As always, there's data and copyright considerations you should always consider. Will someone's data who's going to access your video be used responsibly, and are you breaking copyright law by producing a particular piece of information? And again, that can apply throughout the world, but also where you locally compose. And so that's the kind of concepts I wanted you familiar with for this lecture. I'm going to cut it off now to keep it a little bit brief. I think I think I'll do either an assignment or a discussion where we'll think about writing maybe for a different generation and think about that as a big cultural change, because if we had more time in a 15-week course, maybe we could go and investigate different cultures and figure out how we want to write a manual for different cultures throughout the world. But But since we don't have all that kind of research time, I think what I'll do is have you rework an earlier assignment, and we'll think about doing it for a different aged audience, and think about how people of a different age are from really different cultures from ourselves. So again, 2 more lectures this week, and thanks for listening, everyone.